So good morning and welcome. And welcome. This is like a first morning panel discussion I've been at for a few years. So thank you for joining us. I'm Beth Swanson, CEO of Better Chicago. We're excited to be hosting this panel discussion today in partnership with Start Early, a leader in advancing quality early childhood development and care. We're also excited to welcome you to Impact House. We have been in Impact House for a few years now and happy to talk about all the different social impact organizations in here, after the program if people are interested in learning more. But it's a great great house for all of us to be and share our work together. So Better Chicago is a venture philanthropy that invests in the most promising youth-serving nonprofits in Chicago. And we really try to help children escape poverty. We're really just a supercharger. We have provided more than $65 million in unrestricted funding and management support to help nonprofits in our portfolio grow. And our donors really come to us to make pivotal, well-researched investments to really just lift the outlook of our city. And there's really no better way to do that than to invest in high-quality early childhood programming. So our panel today discusses just that. They know that they know that if you change the first 5 years, you can absolutely change everything in a child's life, and we're excited to have that conversation today. We will begin the discussion today with a presentation from Diana Rauner, president of Start Early, on the early childhood brain development. And we will then move into our panel discussion moderated by Better Chicago's portfolio director, Natalie Barrera. And following that panel, we'll have a discussion and about 10 minutes of Q&A. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Diana Rauner. Diana is the president of Start Early, a public-private partnership that advances quality early learning and care for families with young children to help close the opportunity gap. Start Early provides direct service through center-based and home-based programs, provides professional development tools and training for teachers, implements innovative new solutions in the early childhood field, and advocates for effective local, state, and federal policy that really puts families first. So Diana has been the president of Start Early since 2011. Having previously served as a board member, she holds a doctorate in development psychology from the University of Chicago. And prior to Start Early, she was with Chapin Hall Center for Children. I've also just had the privilege of working with and learning from Diana for over a decade, and it's an honor to partner with her today. So thank you, Diana.
Thank you, Beth. First of all, just welcome. It's an honor to be here, and it's exciting to be back in person. This is, I think, the first, we used to do these kinds of things all the time, and it's been a really long time since we've all had the chance to be together. So it's very nice to see everyone in person. It's very nice to be together in community with others who are working to improve the lives of children in Chicago. So thank you for that opportunity. And just a little bit about Start Early. We have been at this work for 40 years and been beating the drum on early childhood for a very long time, and very grateful that more and more colleagues and partners are coming along with that work. And I wanted to share just a little bit of foundational why early childhood stuff for you before the experts on the panel are going to talk about their work. So of course I have to start because this is the best way to bring the baby in the room, because this is actually one of my babies. This is my granddaughter, Elizabeth Jean, hours after she was born. And then a year later. And the thing about that, of course, is, as we know, in the first picture, she is just a lump of cells. And in the second picture, she's working hard at reading all by herself. And then now at 4, she's pushing her little brother in a swing. And really, the point of all of that is something that everybody has known since their grandmother told them. Babies move really fast. They grow and change really, really quickly. And they develop so much more quickly in the first few years of life than at any other point, that really leads us to the fundamental biology of what's going on in the baby's brain at that point. And this is, again, a pretty classic slide that was actually done and developed here in Chicago at the University of Chicago by a pediatric neuroscientist named Peter Huttenlocher, whose wife was actually my dissertation advisor. And it's pretty basic stuff now, but it was revolutionary at the time because people people didn't really understand what was going on inside babies' brains. Again, babies are born as kind of helpless lumps of clay. They can't self-locomote, they can't move, they can't feed, they can't do anything for themselves, and yet they are at that point. Their brains and their cells are dividing so rapidly that it is estimated that in the first 1,000 days of life, a baby's brain forms 1 million neuron synapses, which is the connections between neurons every second, which is kind of mind-boggling. But it gives you a sense of the pace and the rate of brain development at that point. And that brain development actually it actually peaks. The rate of brain development actually peaks at 2, and then by the time you get to be as old as we are, or some of us in this room, you're very, very efficient, but your brain is a lot less dense. And that's actually a very adaptive and smart way for the brain to develop, because what happens is babies don't really know if they're going to be born in China, in the United States, in Honduras, but they've got to be ready for whatever they get to, right? So one of the things that babies do is they come sort of primed to respond to the environment. And then the environment basically shapes their brain. And so those synapses, which are the connections between neurons, get thicker for the things that matter for them. And the ones that don't matter, like there's a whole lot of sounds in other languages that, we can't recognize because we don't need them, for better or for worse. And because of that, those things just fade away. So that really is the foundational biological shaping of the brain. So why does this matter for development? It matters enormously because it's all about the brain is primed to interact with the environment. And what that means is the brain is primed to interact with the human beings in particular that the child is in front of. And that's really, really how brain development happens. It happens in a serve and return interactive process where children are responding and learning from how they experience the world through the people who care for them. And we talk a lot about attachment. I'm sure everyone in this room has heard about attachment, so I don't have to describe it. But what it really at the fundamental level is it is about how the child's brain is organized to respond to stimulus and interaction, both good and bad. So there are a lot of things that happen in life that are challenging and frustrating. For infants, pretty much everything is challenging and frustrating because they can't do it for themselves. So when a child cries and she's hungry or cold or wet, all she can do is cry. And then what matters is what happens when she's responded to. If she's responded to appropriately and consistently with whatever it takes to fix whatever's wrong with her, then all of the sort of dysregulation that she experiences from being cold and wet, the heart rate racing, the skin, turning red, all the things that you've seen in little babies, calms down, gets to resting state very easily. And you do that 1,000 times for new parents. Maybe it feels like 1,000,000 times. You do that mostly every time pretty much right. And that baby gets a really, really thick synapse between dysregulation and re-regulation that says, okay, when things get hard, something's going to come and help me re-regulate and I'll be okay. And then as she gets older and she tries a lot of new things, walking, tying her shoes, parallel parking. I never got that one. She gets dysregulated and she re-regulates pretty easily. And that is really the gift of attachment, because development is really a process of dysregulation and re-regulation. Everything is hard the first time you do it. And if you can re-regulate easily, then you can focus and return back to resting state and get back to work. It's the children who can't do that. And they can't do it because they haven't had that external support that's taught them how to go from dysregulation to re-regulation. That's really the foundational role of attachment. And we know from research that this attachment is really foundational in parents, but it doesn't just come from parents. And parents themselves need that kind of support in order to be able to be that stable re-regulating force for their own children. And so it isn't just about, mom is the attachment figure. It's about all of the ecosystem that surrounds the primary caregivers. And that's the thing that is so important that I think we've seen here in this last few years, when we've seen the level of disruption and stress and fear, honestly, among so many families, and the importance of supporting families so that they can be present for their children. That is really the most important thing we can do. So the thing about attachment, it's pretty interesting. It's been researched over and over again throughout the literature, and it's actually a very, very stable trait, which unfortunately is very hard to actually access consciously. So most of us in this room have a sense of agency and a sense of our own capabilities that really is rooted in the fact that when we cried, somebody picked us up and cared for us and made us understand that we have the ability to interact and change the world and act on the world, and that our actions lead to predictable results. That's why you try hard at things, because you believe that it's going to make a difference. And I think that foundational piece of understanding, that's the template for pretty much everything that we do. And again, we think a lot about the children who don't have these foundational attachment characteristics because they have received inconsistent or inappropriate responses from the caregivers, the environment that they have experienced. Those are the children that have trouble recovering from disruptions, that feel as though the tiger is always in the room for them, that when they get shoved in line in kindergarten, they cannot recover. Because, and again, this is one of my favorite mantras. I learned it from Roger Weisberg, who founded CASEL, the late Roger Weisberg. Emotion drives attention, and attention drives learning. I know we're all here deeply invested in education, but we have to start with the reality that if you cannot manage your emotions, you cannot focus your attention on the task of learning. And that is foundational to everything that we want to change how well teachers teach. We want to change the characteristics of classrooms. If children cannot focus their own attention, they can not manage their own emotions, they will not be able to attend to learning. And so that is, again, if you take nothing else away from this talk, I hope you'll take this little mantra that, again, comes from Roger Weisberg. So this is, the science of brain development is super clear. But the reality is we're not doing very much as a country to make this science part of our public policy. It is still, I think we would say, there's a whole bunch of statistics on how badly organized our early childhood services are as a country. In our country, and again, we've seen this in the last 3 years, the first 5 years of life were kind of privatized. We kind of expect that families will just figure it out themselves. And that's in contrast to our K-12 system, which, sure isn't perfect, but at least we all acknowledge that we're supposed to be doing that together. And that's really fundamentally what we're here to talk about today. And again, many of you have seen this slide. This is from our colleague Jim Heckman at the University of Chicago, really looking at the return on investment of early learning programs. And Jim did this work really out of his own intellectual curiosity because he was looking at programs later in life that actually had negative returns on investment. And just to see, he just went back and back and back and realized that the earliest years provide the greatest return on investment. And that's not surprising given what we talked about with brain development, because in fact the brain is using that investment and growing and compounding on its own. And what's really fascinating, but not in this slide, is more recent research that he and his team have done on the intergenerational effects. So the fact that one's parent had early childhood experiences actually has a differential impact on how their children are parented and the life outcomes of their children. That's pretty profound because that's fundamentally breaking the cycle of poverty. And it's why we believe that investing in the first few years of life is the most efficient, effective, and important time to invest. Again, we know that this has huge both personal, which is to say moral outcomes. So our mission is to ensure that every child is able to reach their full potential. But we also know this is actually smart for society too, and makes it all the more compelling that we invest. So what does this mean? Why don't we have a system that really prioritizes children and families, and what could we do about it? This is really where a lot of the work that we at Start Early, in partnership with our friends at Action for Children who are here, and many other organizations do. This is really where we start to think about how do we make a community or a city or state or country that puts children and families first. This is an aspirational slide, and so let's just be clear, this isn't happening today. It's where we're aiming for. And we're doing that through a variety of ways. There's advocacy and policy in everything that we do. People think about advocacy and they think about legislative advocacy, which is going to the legislature usually and asking for more money, and that is important. But that's about 10%, really, of what we do. Administrative advocacy is going to the legislature, going to the state agencies, going to the mayor's office. When Beth was in the mayor's office, I went to the mayor's office all the time. and ensuring that public dollars are used as efficiently, as effectively, as transparently as possible for the purposes for which they're intended. And I think that that is one of the things that people lose, is that actually this system is fundamentally a public system. It's publicly funded. It needs innovation. It needs engagement from the private sector, but it also needs continued, and this is like doing your laundry. You never get to stop doing this work. It needs continued focus on administrative advocacy to ensure that dollars are spent well. And particularly when it comes to the most vulnerable populations, children with disabilities, children who are experiencing homelessness, children whose families are involved in the justice system. These are the most vulnerable children, the hardest to reach, and many times public programs, publicly funded programs, they want to, but they can't really, and we aren't making it enough of a priority. Similarly, the hardest people to reach in this country are rural pregnant women, infants, and toddlers. I'll just say it's much easier to run a preschool than to run an infant toddler program. We have to continue to push on the places where it's hardest, and yet these are the opportunities that are most important. So you're going to hear from the panel here very quickly about workforce. I wanted to share a little bit about the early child workforce. These are some statistics on just the dire state, the almost existential crisis that we have in our field around workforce. And again, the essential role of policy and advocacy in ensuring that we increase compensation, that we make it easier for people who want to work in this field to attain licenses, credentials, and degrees, that we make sure that the entire early childhood system is supported. That means not just preschool teachers, but also home visitors, early intervention workforce, early intervention providers, and family support workers, all the people who are part of that early childhood ecosystem. In the last couple of years, we've focused with our partners on ensuring that all of those folks are inside the solution set, if you will. We've worked a lot on using COVID dollars to provide state grants and hero bonuses to the workforce. We've continued to advocate for access to scholarships for early childhood work for the workforce, funding for educational debt relief, and strengthening pathways for folks to enter the field and move along with those credentials. And, one of the things that we at Start Early have begun doing more intensively in the last few years than we have before, when I would just go to Beth and yell at Rom, is make sure that early childhood education is a priority in the city budget. And that means working with the city council and educating them. We organized a coalition of early childhood providers last year and advocates to make sure that the mayor's office and the city council increased investments in local funding for early childhood infrastructure efforts. This is a time of a lot of transition and change in our city around early childhood, and we wanted to make sure that we were keeping focus on that work. So we always end with a pitch to get involved. And so my pitch is you, too, can be an advocate for early childhood. You can ask questions of your alderman. You can talk to your state representatives. Please get involved any way you can. The more voices that talk about early childhood and raise this as, when we talk about children, K-12 is nice, but let's not just elide little babies into that system, but actually think about the early childhood system as well. So with that, I will pass it over to Natalie.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Natalie Barrera. I'm Portfolio Director at A Better Chicago, and I'll be your moderator this morning. Thank you so much, Diana, for that information. I think it's super helpful. Joining me this morning is Deanna McLaren. She is the Vice President of the Head Start Early Head Start Network at Start Early, and Jesse Ilhart, who's the co-founder and executive director of VOCEL. Thanks so much for joining us. I know it's early, so glad to see you here. Glad to see all of you here. Before we start, I know there's a lot of folks who are champions in the early learning field, but for the folks who may not be so familiar with early learning, I wanted to just share some quick stats that come from the Every Child Ready Chicago Landscape Summary that was produced in partnership with Start Early and the Mayor's Office back in 2021. So just some quick stats. There are about 193,000 children in the city of Chicago that are 0 to 5 years old. About 25% of all of the children 0 to 5 that live in Illinois live in the city, so that's a huge amount. Chicago is home to a third of Latinx children and about half of our Black children. A third speak a language other than English at home, so we are a very rich, cultural, diverse city, right? We all know that, but it's always helpful to hear those facts. But we also know, as Diana mentioned, there are a lot of barriers and challenges that we're currently facing. About 25% of our children, 0 to 5, live in poverty. About 40% of women do not receive adequate prenatal care. And we know that Black women experience higher rates of maternal mortality, and Black children experience higher rates of infant mortality. And we also know that close to 6,000 children 0 to 5 go without health insurance, so they don't have access to quality health care. And although we've made significant improvements in our system over time, only 28% of children that entered kindergarten in 2019 were considered kindergarten ready. So those are some sobering statistics that I think are important to just keep in mind as we have this conversation. And of course, our experts are going to help contextualize that data based on what they're seeing in the field, what they're trying to change in the field. And so I'm really excited to engage in conversation with you all. Quick reminder, we'll do about 20 minutes of the panel discussion, and then we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A. So please hold your questions to the end. We want to make sure we engage in conversation with you all. All right, so let's get into it. Deanna, can you just tell me a little bit more about what it is that you do at Start Early, and what are you trying to accomplish?
Okay. So as you mentioned, Natalia, I am the Vice President of the Head Start Network. So I oversee our Head Start grant, about 2,200 children in the city of Chicago. We serve about 28 communities in the city. We spanned 37 communities in the city. And our goal is really to continue to promote school readiness and also social emotional development, nutrition, and wellness for our babies. And again, not just for our children that we serve and Start Early, but for all the children in the city. We also want to leverage our expertise and our knowledge to improve quality of services for children and families. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. Do you do some work around prenatal care?
We do. So at Start Early, we have a doula network, and so we provide, and also we have a program that we directly operate under Start Early. They provide doula services for pregnant teens, and in the doula program, we have a lot of programs. So in the doula program, we provide training to doulas. So we had midwives that provide training to the doulas. We are part of prenatal visits. We are part of labor and delivery. We are there from the beginning through the end of delivery. And then with the baby, most babies transition to home visiting services. And so they transition right into one of our programs as well.
Can you tell us really briefly, what is home visiting for the folks who may not be familiar?
Yes, so home visiting is our home visitors their background is in early childhood or social work, and they go into the homes once a week for about 90 minutes and provide educational services to the parent and the children. So it's really teaching the parent how to work with their child, especially, with our young moms also, when you're a first-time parent. I always say I was a home visitor in a migrant program in Carbondale, Illinois for 5.5 years. And so I always say to the home visitors, it's a privilege to go into someone's home. Like, just imagine, I don't know if I will be opening my door every week for someone to come and really teach me how to work with my child. So I always say, this is something that families are trusting us to come into their home, into their space. And so for us, I love all early childhood programs, but that's my baby, right? Because that means a lot for a lot of us. So with the home visiting, we do 0 to 3. We have a few children ages 0 to 3, and then we have a few that are 3 to 5. So the preschool age children, and we find that most of my immigrant families, a lot of time in our Hispanic communities, they want to stay with the abuela, they want to stay with the grandma till they go to kindergarten. So we find more in the Hispanic community that we provided 3 to 5, but it's a few 3 to 5 preschool age children in home visiting in the city, not many.
Great, thank you. Jessie, tell us a little bit about what you do at VOCEL and what VOCEL stands for.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Jessie Ilhart. I'm our co-founder and executive director at VOCEL, which stands for Viewing Our Children as Emerging Leaders. And similar to what Deanna was talking about and many early childhood organizations in the city, we are all about kids, but we take a slightly different angle in terms of our work with early childhood. We do seek to help ensure every child has the foundation to learn, grow, and lead, but we do that by working with the adults who most impact their brain development. So we have a portfolio of programs that works with parents and caregivers, elementary school teachers, pre-K and kindergarten and first grade teachers, and then also elementary school principals, all group-based programs, creating a community of support, but also in service of making sure that those folks who have that impact on early brain development have the knowledge, tools, and support to really affect that change with young children.
Awesome, great. There's a lot of different programs, obviously, that are being offered by your organizations and by a ton of other early learning providers in the city. But I also know that there's a lot of challenges for families to access these services, and that a lot of our programs go underutilized, right? Even though there's open slots, whether that's in community-based childcare or just home visiting. Can you talk a little bit about what are some of those challenges that families are facing in accessing these programs, and why do they go underutilized?
I can start. So interestingly, VOCEL used to run a full day early learning center on the far west side of Chicago in Austin. And in working with families in that program, one of the things we used to hear is that families wanted all sorts of different things from their early childhood program. Just as you can imagine, like thinking of yourself, if you had young children or have young children, the needs really vary and the preferences for what folks are looking for. And sometimes I think that can be in tension with a system that's highly regulated and has really set types of programs. So we would hear sometimes that families would come and say, I'm looking for a place for my child to learn, to socialize with other kids, but I do want them with grandma. I don't want them in a full day program, or I don't want them somewhere 5 days a week. I don't want them without me. I want to be with my child at this age or whatnot. We're hearing families say maybe their work hours weren't lining up with the work hours of a preschool center that was near their home. And so I think that's a really interesting challenge we face in terms of underutilization of the services that are offered, that the system right now is not as focused on what those individual family needs and preferences might be, not as much as I think we see in the private pay kind of sector for early childhood, where it's maybe more responsive to what individual families might want and sort of developing programs around that. I think with that in mind, the programs that exist have made really big strides to accommodate those families' needs the best they can to really support some of those barriers, whether it is work hours or transportation, but I think it continues to be a challenge.
Deanna, what would you add to that? What are you saying?
I will add also that, excuse me, that sometimes our parents are not aware of these resources that they have in their community. What we see is that most of our referrals, no matter how many tweets or how many posts or how many flyers we put out, it's like the word of mouth. Word of mouth, our parents telling another parent, hey, I take my child down the street. That school is pretty good. So I think that's one of the reasons the parents, some of them, we've seen it during the pandemic, a lot of us didn't go anywhere for a long time. So, and we have seen it now during the pandemic. Our enrollment has really decreased in the past 2 years in the city, and it's because we don't have that contact with, with others. And so that's one. I think that the other one, it could, depending on, the community, is that fear of, I'm going to come full day for free. I don't have to pay anything. I don't trust you yet. So that goes back to that trust, right? Developing that trust with your provider. I would say the fear, not being able to communicate with the provider. And then sometimes, like you mentioned, not being able to really address the needs of our families. Some of our families work long shifts, 2 jobs from 7 to 9. So a program that is open from 7 to 6 is not going to meet my needs if I'm getting off at 9 o'clock. And so that's some of the challenges that we see with our families.
So it's an issue with, parents may not know what resources are available to them. Work schedules may not actually align with the programs that are available. They're not meeting individual needs, right? If folks are working one place, working in another place, and they just want maybe part-time option versus full-time. So there's a lot of barriers, not even to mention just the bureaucracy of applying for programs, being able to be eligible for services. All of that documentation then becomes another complication, right?
Which I think, I will say our programs, in the city, we have done a good job with really providing those supports to parents, because it's just like filling out an application for college, for still helping my 24-year-old in a master program trying to fill out applications. Like, it's a lot. It's a lot of information that you have to, like the check stubs. No, we need your W-2s. Now we need a physical. We need immunizations. It's a list, like a page and a half of bullet points, a list the parents need to come to bring to be able to enroll in the program. So sometimes if you need that right away, it's like, I don't have that. Let me just go up to my neighbor and she can watch my child. So those are some of the challenges too that we face.
And I think that makes me think about how the number of barriers or kind of hoops that parents have to jump through, the more of them, right, it becomes easier and easier for a parent to opt out or opt to that easier option. And I think we see then how critical it is that parents understand the value of these early learning experiences, which isn't widespread. I think for those of us in the field, it feels like how obvious that this brain growth happens in these early years, but that's not yet mainstream. And so if parents have to jump through all those hoops and then they think it's just a nice to have maybe for their child to be in an early learning program and don't realize how important it is for their brain development, I think we see that it is it's not the easy way out, definitely, but it's definitely an easier option sometimes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Thank you. That's super helpful. We've talked a lot about access to programs, but I'm interested in kind of thinking about what does access to high quality programs really look like. We know that access is just one thing, but they need to be high quality, right? So can you talk a little bit about what high quality looks like in the programs that you serve? How do you ensure that you're providing high quality experiences to children and their families? And then we can start with you, Tiana.
So high quality is expensive, right? Like anything. So for us, is having different funders, which could, a child. Let's think about a child in the classroom. They playing, they learning, they don't know, but that child might have like 3. So I'll talk about our programs. They will have a Head Start fund. They will have Head Start funding. They will have preschool for all funding. They will have childcare funding. They might be private. So a child might have like 4 different funders that provide that funding for that seat. But that gives us as programs the opportunity really to provide services, for longer hours, have more teachers in the classroom, have support not only for the teachers, have qualified teachers in the classroom, but not only that, but also support for the families. All of our programs have family support specialists. So these are, think of social workers. They work with our family on different goals, whether it be, finding a job, I want to buy a home, I want to open a bank account. And then we have mental health services. So we have mental health consultants. They come and provide support to our children, to our staff, to our families. Most of our programs also have nurses that come and provide educational services to our staff, nutritionists. So that's what it takes for high quality, to have all of this support: health, mental health, the social work, the nutritionist, the pediatrician, the dentist, and then have a smaller classroom. So instead of having, in our early Head Start programs, instead of having 20 children in a classroom, you will have 15 children in a classroom with 3 teachers. You will have 7 to 8 children in the infant and toddler classroom with 3 teachers. So that's what high quality really is. And for us at Start Early, we are pretty committed to using our data to inform our practice. So for me, I will say is, the data utilization, the family engagement, the early childhood opportunities, and then our partnerships with, with different advocates in the field, because we cannot do this alone.
Yeah.
So having those 4 pieces in place.
Great, thank you. Jesse, what does quality look like in your programs? Or how are you supporting quality?
So Deanna was talking about supporting parents, and that's a big part of our work at VOCEL. One of our programs is the Child Parent Academy, where we bring parents together in groups of 10 at schools, elementary schools around the city, and support them in learning about early brain development, kind of this idea of democratizing brain science or making it accessible. And so quality is a big part of the conversation. But working with parents and then also with elementary school principals, who are a very interesting group because they often don't have that knowledge of the early years, but are now overseeing programs that have 4-year-olds in their building. Both of those groups are not coming from a place where they've gone to school for early childhood education. So talking about quality has to be boiled down at VOCEL to really digestible, easy to understand concepts. And so 3 things that we talk about. One is nurture, so high levels of co-regulation, and Diana was talking about the idea of dysregulation and then re-regulation, and we talk with families about co-regulation, so the importance that before they can expect their child to control their behavior, they need to help their child to control that, right? And so calming down together is a big part of that nurture. The second thing is responsive relationships. So when a child says something or glances at something or points at something, that is a serve that the parent or caregiver can return by saying something back or making a gesture or a silly face or babbling, and that back and forth builds those brain connections that Diana was talking about. And then the third thing we talk about is learning through play. So the idea that even though play can sometimes seem sort of frivolous or fluffy, it's really the best way for young children to learn. Before founding Vocell, I had the opportunity to go see some really exemplary schools across the country. And I saw some EduCare schools operated by Start Early, the Atlanta Speech School in Atlanta, Georgia, Park West Co-op right here in Chicago. Saw these schools that were centering almost their entire school day on play, and really prioritizing children's ideas and curiosity and creativity. And it's not just fluffy, it's actually setting up that foundation for future leadership. And then we see, though, that that's really the exception, not the norm in schools. And so that's one of the pieces of quality that we're really focused on, is making sure parents, teachers, school leaders see the importance of those pieces and can bring them in, whether it's at home or at school.
Great. So quality is not just about teacher-student ratios, it's also about supporting the whole family through these comprehensive wraparound services. It's about preparing parents and supporting parents to be their child's first teacher, and also principals, right, who are leading early learning programs, who may not have any early childhood experience, and really thinking about a play-based curriculum to support children's learning. So we are going to wrap up soon, but just quickly, we know that the pandemic has completely changed the early learning landscape, right? And Diana mentioned that the workforce is really just facing a very significant crisis. I'd love to hear from both of you. What can be done to help address some of those challenges? What are you seeing are the needs of the workforce, especially kind of emerging out of this pandemic? And we'll start with you.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Big one.
Yeah, that's a big one. What can be done? I mean, really, compensation. That's number one. It's like no matter how much we go around and try, like, compensation is number one. The second one, and I think that we were doing this before in early childhood, but I think we had learned more through the pandemic, like really providing an environment of well-being for our staff, not just our children and our families, but our staff. Our staff had to deal with a lot during the pandemic, we were at that point, we realized, like, oh, we are essential workers too. And so we were closed for a few weeks and then back up, open our schools. And so that, but a lot of staff had to deal with the stress of having to come to work while my child was still at home. So I will say, wellness, mental health support for staff. And the other one is professional development, of having really a structured support in our programs for professional development. We're not only teachers, but our family support workers that I mentioned earlier, where they can have the opportunity really to grow in their career. So we'll say those three.
So mental health supports, obviously compensation. Can't do anything without paying people, right? It's important.
And professional development.
Awesome. Jesse, what do you?
And one more, Jesse. I'm sorry. And then advocates, right? Because that helps. Like, now we see more people talking about early childhood. It's just not, the early childhood folks talking about it. So having more people that really understand the importance of that early education, that 0 to 5, the importance of that in helping us advocate for our children. Our children don't have a voice because they're so tiny. Yeah. So we had the opportunity to, have that voice for them. So that would be my fourth one. So.
Advocacy, yep.
Sorry,
Jesse. No, that's all right. I'm glad you started with compensation, because I think that often in the education sector, early education, social services, we think that people are in it just for the goodwill, for it's hard work, and it is hard work, but also people need to pay their bills. And so thinking about how attractive the profession is in general, I think, is critical. The support absolutely is something that we have seen at Vocell, that parents and teachers and school leaders are craving community and time to talk with each other, and that is a big part of persevering through some of these challenging phases, whether it may be because of compensation or other stressors of the pandemic or unrelated. And so I think that community of support can be really critical in these times. And at Vosel, one of the other things we've noticed as we've started to pilot a program over the past few years where we're selecting parent leaders from different communities to lead the Child Parent Academy for their peers, we're seeing that there is this wealth of potential in communities as teachers. So parents who may not have had the opportunity to go to school for early childhood education, their interest is piqued as they learn about brain development, and they become like fascinated and sort of like evangelists for it, right? They want to tell everyone about play. And so how do we capitalize on that and kind of create these innovative like pathways into the teaching field is something that we've been thinking about more. But I think the additional side of that is thinking about what does make the workforce, the opportunity to be an early childhood professional attractive. And in our publicly funded system, as like Diana was talking about, we want to see more innovation. I think that would allow for maybe more autonomy, flexibility in the roles, because right now they could be really rigid. And what I'm seeing from the generations coming out of college, that's not what they're looking for, right? Yeah. They're looking for a space where they can go in and be a leader and shape something. And so figuring out how we do that in the early childhood field, it's a big challenge, but I think it emphasizes the need for the public-private partnership and to be able to have folks from the business community strategize with us about how do we do that? How do we create this innovation in a system that is sort of set from a government side?
Great, thank you so much for that. I do want to leave some room for questions, so we have a couple minutes if anyone has a question or a thought or heard anything that really resonated with them. Go back here.
Hi, there's a movement to change the workday schedule for early childhood educators to go to a 10-4 model where you're working 4 days, 10 hours, and you get that 1 day off. Do you think that kind of creativity will make it a much easier workplace for many educators?
I'm going to let you speak to that, but I will say I think that could be one. I think there has to be many, because one thing we've heard from parents who are interested in teaching is, but I have to take my kid to school. And school drop-offs in Chicago range, right, from like 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. If your kid has to get dropped off at 9, when do you start work and how do you get back to pick them up? And so I would love to see, we have mixed delivery model in terms of how we do services, but like mixed model in terms of staffing. And I know that's so challenging to think about how to operationalize that, but I think a 10-4 could work really well for some people too.
No, I mean, I was going to say, yeah, one of many probably, but that will be good. And is that something different, bringing something different into the early childhood? We are so set on compliance, and I think that we're ready. Like, yes, bring us some new ideas. What can we do different? So, I mean, I'm thinking like, we might want to.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
We might want to try that one. Yeah, that's a good idea.
I think we have one question over here. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Nikki Grace. I am the Director of Innovation at Urban Initiatives. We provide sport and youth-based play to UCE students. So one of my questions that came up for me is you all talked a little bit about how the system isn't necessarily responsive to the needs of our parents, but also at the same time we're operating within a system that is highly regulated. Mm-hmm. So for me, those two things seem to be in like direct conflict. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if you have seen any strides in terms of, even Diana, if you could speak into this, advocacy, like what has been working and where are we at now in terms of like where we need to be hankering down on advocating for system change.
Do you want to take that, Dan, or do you want me to?
Go ahead. Yeah, that's a really good question.
So many different places, but one of the most important, I think, is we want to have the same time. I'll just holler. At the same time that we think about ensuring teacher quality, and ensuring the training and credentialing of teachers, we have to think about multiple pathways to bringing people into the field and the speed at which we can get them in the field. One of the biggest challenges that we have, Dan, I know you can speak to this better, is just getting people through the licensing and the approval system. We can hire a teacher, and what is it, maybe 45 days? How long is it?
Yeah, background checks in the state of Illinois can take 6 weeks.
So this is one of the biggest, like, we've got a workforce crisis, and we have a sclerotic system to actually bring people in. That would be the place we could like wave a magic wand and fix that.
That would be one.
30 years, but
But that's one, yeah.
Okay, maybe one more question. Oh, wow. Let's go right here.
Hi, I'm Karen Briere from Distinctive Schools. We're talking and we're intentionally really trying to move our schools into more of a community hub setting for families, for students, for the community. And so two things that I'm really thinking about, you know, how we have kids and families coming to our school, that's where they come the most, right? And so we have access to kids, we have access to families. And so how can we develop a workforce within our schools so that, you know, parents who maybe are looking for a job or looking for a new career, you know, can we start to think more about workforce development within schools to help families who are maybe more like lower income, who need those opportunities, and who also need the help to navigate those spaces, right? And then also I think, you know, coming in to teach the families about early childhood. You know, I know that we already have their students with us as school age because we're, you know, K to 12, but, you know, how can we get them to help their babies that are at home or help them navigate, you know, all the resources that are out there?
Who wants to take that one?
Jesse.
I mean, we really think of some of our school partners as some of those hubs. And so it's one of the reasons that we're pushing in services into a school because they have this sort of captive audience in some ways of families. I think one of the things that schools can do as well, though, is reach out to the community and bring in folks who don't have students yet at that school. Because sometimes by the time a child is 5 years old, right, it's definitely not too late. It's never too late, but you've missed that critical window where the brain development is most rapid. And so some of the families we talk with say, gosh, I wish I had known about this when my 16-year-old was 3 years old, right? And it maybe would have changed some things about that teenager relationship. Maybe not. But yes, I think that having that hub is a real powerful opportunity also for the, in the reverse direction, not only for the schools to be able to support the families, but for families to be able to help shape the school, because often we hear from families once they're in the community and feel that trust, they can speak up and say, this discipline method that's being used at the school is not responsive to my child or is not aligned with our familial or cultural beliefs. And so I think that two-way exchange is really powerful.
So let's definitely talk about partnering, because I think there's an opportunity there with a lot of the work for VOCEL that they do with educators in school. So I think that's an opportunity. And we are at time. It's so exciting to see so many questions. Time just flew by. An hour is not enough. It never is, right? But thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to you all for engaging. I think I'm going to pass it to Beth or Becky to close out. Becky, to close this out.
Thank you so much for coming today. I hope you found the session really informative. And thank you so much, Jesse. Thank you so much, Deanna. Thank you, Natalie. And thank you so much, Diana, for sharing so much great information with us. If you'd like to learn more, please feel free to hang around and talk with any of us. As you can tell, there are great strides being made in early childhood education, but there's much more work to do. So thank you again for joining us today, and hope you have a great day. Thank you.